Kendra Davis had always understood that stepping into a corporate boardroom as a Black woman came with extra weight. She had to be twice as good, twice as cautious, and twice as resilient as her colleagues. This wasn't a lesson she learned recently. It had been ingrained in her long before she ever walked through the doors of Caldwell Enterprises, a powerhouse in the tech world. For the past 5 years, she had poured every bit of her energy into her job, climbing the corporate ladder despite the whispers, the judgmental looks, and the hurdles thrown her way. Today should have been a triumphant day for Kendra. She had just secured a major contract that would bring millions of dollars to the company. Her coworkers had congratulated her, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of pride, a rare occurrence for someone so used to downplaying her own achievements. But that moment was shattered when an email from Victor Caldwell's office appeared in her inbox. Her stomach tightened the moment she read the subject line, "Kendra, please come to my office. We need to discuss your future with the company." Asterisk, asterisk. Kendra had never trusted Victor Caldwell. He was the type of boss who wielded his power like a hammer, making decisions based more on feeding his ego than on recognizing who actually delivered results. Though he never said it outright, Kendra always sensed that Victor saw her differently. She felt it in the subtle digs, the condescending comments, and the way he dismissed her contributions. Still, she had learned to push forward, keeping her head down and proving herself over and over again. When Kendra entered his office, Victor didn't even bother to look up. He waved his hand for her to sit down, his eyes glued to the documents spread out on his desk. The silence in the room was thick and uncomfortable, stretching out for what felt like forever until Victor finally spoke. "Kendra, we're letting you go." His words hit her like a freight train. For a moment, she could hardly breathe. "Letting me go?" she repeated softly, her voice barely steady. "Why?" Victor finally lifted his eyes to meet hers, his face blank and unreadable. "You no longer fit the direction we're taking the company." Kendra's head swirled. No longer fit. How could that be possible? She had just secured the biggest deal of the quarter. She was one of the company's top performers. How could this be happening? As her thoughts raced, she realized Victor wasn't going to explain himself further. His tone and body language made it clear this wasn't about her performance. This was about something much darker, something that had likely been simmering beneath the surface all along. Standing up, her legs shaky beneath her, Kendra left the office without another word. But as she walked out, a fire started to burn inside her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Kendra stepped out of the building, her heart racing and her mind in turmoil. The cold air hit her face as she walked onto the busy street, but she barely noticed. She had just been fired, for no reason other than being someone Victor Caldwell couldn't control. It had nothing to do with her skills or her hard work. This was something far more sinister. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She needed time to process what had just happened. Kendra had always known there were unspoken rules in the corporate world. She had learned how to navigate them, working harder and being smarter than her peers just to be seen as equal. But today, she realized something devastating. No matter how hard she worked, she would never fit into Victor Caldwell's world. She wandered into a small cafe and found a seat by the window. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, almost suffocating. What now? Her mind filled with questions. How would she pay her bills? How would she explain this to her family? Kendra had been the first in her family to graduate from college, the first to secure a corporate job. Her mother had always been so proud of her, telling everyone who would listen about her daughter's success. How could Kendra now tell her that it had all come crashing down? Taking out her phone, she scrolled through her missed messages. One was from her best friend Mia, and another from her younger brother Marcus. They would find out soon enough, but Kendra wasn't ready to talk just yet. She needed time to think, to figure out her next move. She ordered a coffee and stared out of the window, watching cars pass by, their headlights a blur in the early evening. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment in Victor's office, to the cold and detached way he had dismissed her, as if everything she had worked for meant nothing to him. Kendra wasn't the first woman of color to be treated this way, and sadly, she knew she wouldn't be the last. But what struck her was the ease with which Victor had done it. So matter-of-fact, so casual, as if he had every right to take away all her hard work without a second thought. It lit a flame of anger inside her. Kendra had spent her entire life being careful. Careful not to make waves. Careful not to draw too much attention to herself. Careful to be exactly what others expected her to be. But today, she realized that all her carefulness hadn't protected her from this. And for the first time, Kendra wasn't sure she wanted to be careful anymore. Kendra Davis had always been careful. Careful not to be seen as too angry, too difficult, or too black for the corporate world. She played by the rules, kept her head down, and did everything to prove her worth. But where had that gotten her? Fired, discarded without a second thought. The realization hit her hard, and she knew she was done playing by their rules. That evening, Kendra sat in her small apartment with her laptop open, scrolling through old emails, documents, and performance reviews. She spent hours trying to make sense of what had happened. Her work had been impeccable. Her performance reviews were glowing, filled with praise from clients, and she had a proven track record of success. There was no valid reason for her termination, and that made her even angrier. Determined to take action, Kendra opened a new email and began typing a message to her friend Sarah, an attorney she had known since college. She needed to know if there was anything she could do, if she had any legal grounds to challenge her firing. Kendra wasn't going to let this go quietly, not without a fight. After drafting the message, she hesitated for a moment, but then sent it off, feeling a small surge of resolve. As she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed again. This time, she picked it up. It was Mia, her best friend. "Kendra, where have you been? I've been texting you all day." Mia's voice was full of concern. Kendra sighed, knowing she couldn't put off the conversation any longer. "I got fired." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line.
What? How?
Why? Mia's voice was a mixture of shock and outrage. "I don't know," Kendra replied, rubbing her temples in frustration. "Victor said I didn't fit the company's direction anymore." "That's ridiculous," Mia snapped. "You've been busting your ass there for years. They can't just fire you like that." Kendra felt her throat tighten. "I know, but they did." After a moment of silence, Mia's voice softened. "So, what are you going to do?" "I'm meeting with Sarah tomorrow," Kendra said, her tone resolute. "I want to see if I have a case. This isn't just about my performance, Mia. It's about who I am, and I'm not going to let them get away with it." Mia's voice was full of support. "Good. You deserve so much better than that place, and if anyone can fight this, it's you." Kendra felt a small smile creep onto her face, a flicker of hope igniting inside her. "Thanks, Mia. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not going down without a fight." After hanging up, Kendra glanced at the email she had written to Sarah and hit send. As the message disappeared from her screen, she felt a plan slowly forming in her mind. She wasn't sure how things would unfold, but one thing was certain. Victor Caldwell had made a mistake, and soon, he would realize just how big of a mistake it was. The next day, Kendra found herself walking into a sleek law office downtown. Her nerves were on edge, her stomach tied up in knots, but she was determined to see this through. Sarah Langley, her old college friend and now a well-respected employment lawyer, greeted her with a warm hug. "Kendra, it's so good to see you. I just wish it were under better circumstances," Sarah said as she led Kendra into a private conference room. "Yeah, me too," Kendra replied, sitting down at the long conference table. "Thanks for seeing me on such short notice." "Of course," Sarah said, her voice reassuring. "Now, tell me everything." Kendra took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the past few days, the sudden firing, the vague explanation, and the years of microaggressions and subtle racism she had endured in the company. As she spoke, Sarah's expression grew more serious. When Kendra finished, Sarah leaned back, her brows furrowed. "This sounds like a classic case of discrimination," Sarah said firmly. "It's not uncommon for companies to use vague excuses like not a good fit or restructuring to cover up discriminatory practices. The question is, can we prove it?" Kendra felt her heart sink. "So, You're saying I might not have a case? Sarah shook her head. No, I'm saying we need evidence. You mentioned other minority employees were let go under similar circumstances. If we can find a pattern, we could build a case for systemic discrimination. Kendra nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. I know a few people who were let go around the same time. I'll reach out to them. Good, Sarah said, leaning forward, her tone serious. I'll start working on the legal side of things. This is going to be a tough fight, but if you're willing to see it through, I believe we have a good chance of winning. Kendra met Sarah's gaze, the fire inside her burning brighter than ever. I'm ready. Let's do this. Over the next few weeks, Kendra worked tirelessly, reaching out to former colleagues who had also been fired under Victor's leadership. Some were hesitant to speak out, fearful of the repercussions, but others were eager to help. Jamal, a former IT manager who had been let go under suspicious circumstances, was one of those willing to share his story. He got rid of me for no reason, too, Jamal said during one of their conversations. And it wasn't just me. There were others. Anyone who didn't fit his mold was out the door. Hearing Jamal's words, Kendra felt a surge of anger mixed with a strange sense of validation. It wasn't just her. There was a pattern here, a pattern of discrimination that was slowly coming into focus. Jamal's story wasn't the only one. As Kendra continued her investigation, more and more stories came to light. Stories of talented employees being pushed out simply because they didn't fit into the narrow vision that Victor Caldwell had for his company. It was becoming clear that what had happened to Kendra wasn't an isolated incident. As the trial neared its conclusion, Kendra felt a surge of emotion. This battle had been exhausting, but she had fought with everything she had. And now, victory seemed within reach. In the final days of the trial, Victor's legal team tried to mount a defense, claiming that the firings were purely business decisions and had nothing to do with discrimination. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury could see through the defense's attempts to deflect blame. When the verdict finally came in, Kendra held her breath. The jury found in her favor, ruling that Victor Caldwell and Caldwell Enterprises had indeed engaged in systemic discrimination. The damages awarded were substantial, not only compensating Kendra for her wrongful termination but also sending a strong message to corporations everywhere. As she left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, Kendra felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had stood up to a powerful man and a broken system, and she had won. But more than that, she had paved the way for others to do the same. Kendra knew this wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And as she walked away from the courthouse, head held high, she knew that this was only the beginning. As Kendra concluded her press conference, the room buzzed with energy. Cameras clicked furiously, and reporters jostled to ask questions, but she had said everything she needed to say. She had taken the first step toward justice, not just for herself, but for all those who had been wronged under Victor Caldwell's leadership. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets covered the trial relentlessly, with Kendra becoming a focal point of the conversation. Headlines declared her a hero, a brave whistleblower standing up against a powerful CEO. But the court battle was far from easy. Victor's legal team tried everything to discredit her, digging into her past and questioning her professionalism, but Kendra's team was always one step ahead. Sarah had prepared meticulously, knowing that the truth was on their side. Each accusation from Victor's lawyers was met with solid counter-evidence, and former employees like Jamal testified in Kendra's defense, painting a clear picture of systemic discrimination. The real breakthrough came when Janice took the stand. Her testimony was the final nail in Victor's defense. Janice spoke calmly, detailing the numerous warnings HR had issued to Victor about his discriminatory practices, warnings that he had brazenly ignored. The jury listened intently as Janice described how Victor's unchecked power allowed him to terminate employees based on race and identity, rather than merit. The evidence, presented by Janice, was irrefutable. Emails, internal memos, and signatures all pointed to Victor's direct involvement. For the first time since the trial had begun, Victor Caldwell looked shaken. Gone was the confident, untouchable CEO. He now sat with a pale face, realizing the gravity of his actions and the consequences they carried. After weeks of intense legal back and forth, the day of the verdict arrived. Kendra sat anxiously beside Sarah, her palms sweaty as the jury filed back into the room. Her entire future rested on this moment. The courtroom was silent, the tension thick in the air, as the jury foreperson stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Victor Caldwell and Caldwell Enterprises, guilty of discrimination. Kendra's heart soared. She had won. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Kendra sat still, letting the weight of the victory sink in. She glanced at Victor, who sat frozen in disbelief, his empire now crumbling around him. For Kendra, this wasn't just a win in court. It was a personal victory, a reclaiming of her dignity after years of injustice. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed Kendra, eager for her reaction. She smiled graciously, but her mind was already on the next steps. Her victory wasn't just hers alone. It was for every employee who had been mistreated and silenced. It was a call to action for others to stand up against injustice, no matter how powerful the oppressor. After the trial, Kendra's life changed dramatically. She became a symbol of empowerment and resilience. Invitations poured in for her to speak at conferences, appear on television shows, and share her story with the world. Book publishers reached out, wanting her to write a memoir about her journey. But while the public recognition was gratifying, it was the personal sense of peace that meant the most to Kendra. She had stood up to a corrupt system and fought for what was right, and she had come out stronger. Sitting in her new office, one that she had earned through grit and perseverance, Kendra reflected on the long journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments where she had doubted herself, but she had never given up. Now, she was ready for the next chapter of her life, whatever it might bring. Her victories served as a reminder that, no matter how daunting the fight, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and demand justice. Kendra had reclaimed her voice, and in doing so, she had inspired countless others to do the same. If Kendra's story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of resilience and justice. Let us know in the comments how you would handle a situation like Kendra's, and always remember, it's never too late to stand up for what's right.